Hello and welcome to the Fit to Transform podcast, where you learn how to train and diet effectively and, most importantly, how to maintain those results for life, once and for all. I'm Nikias Tomasiello, a transgender training and nutrition coach working online with anyone who's ready for a true lifestyle transformation, anywhere they may be in the world. As a friendly reminder, any and all information provided is for educational purposes only. You should consult with your doctor before implementing any changes to your diet and exercise program. With that disclaimer out of the way, thank you for being here. Now grab yourself a cup of tea or pre-workouts and enjoy. Yo, welcome back to the podcast and thank you for tuning into this solo episode about the 4 phases that I use to help my clients transform their physique from year to year. This is an all-important podcast because setting your calories and macros and getting a hypertrophy-oriented training program is very important, but it can only take you so far. Your physique development plan is going to include phases if you want it to be successful. And that's for a number of reasons. Number one, your goals are going to evolve. Nobody has a fat loss goal for their entire life. For some people, it can take a really long time, months, even years, but eventually your priorities will shift. Number two, focusing on a single aspect of physique development is not enough to develop a physique. Yes, you want to lose body fat in certain stages, but in other stages, you're going to have to build muscle if you really want to make a substantial change. And in other phases still, you may not be able to focus on either with the necessary dedication. So you are going to focus on consolidating the habits that you've already built. As you can tell from this premise, there's an art and a science to planning these phases and combining them together into a plan that yields the best body recomposition results for you, your lifestyle, preferences, and unique psychology, which is exactly why I do it as a full-time job. And in this solo episode, I want to take you through the 4 main phases that I implement in my clients' plans. And I want to give you 2 examples of imaginary clients that have very different goals to show you how these phases can be applied effectively. So let's start with a breakdown of these 4 phases. Phase number 1 is what I call a primer phase. The goal in this phase is to build the necessary skills to accomplish whatever phase you have planned next, be it fat loss or muscle growth, because the skills for the 2 goals are similar in some ways, because while some skills are common to both goals, for example, tracking calories and hitting a certain amount of protein, other skills vary considerably. At this stage, I usually start a brand new client around their maintenance calories at first. And then as we progress them through the primer phase, I transition them to the same targets and in particular to the same calorie targets that they'll aim to achieve on average in the phase that we're priming them for. Phase number 2 is a fat loss phase, which kind of does what it says on the tin. The goal is usually to lose body fat at an average rate of 0.5 to 1.5% of the client's starting body weight per week, most weeks. For some people who carry a considerable amount of body fat, I may push this rate up to 2%, but typically 0.5 to 1.5 is what I found to be most effective for most people to be consistent and also safest to preserve muscle mass and maintain and nurture their relationship with food and food flexibility. Phase number 3 is a muscle gain phase, which can be conducted in a surplus or at maintenance calories. In a surplus, the goal is to gain weight in order to put on muscle mass at a faster rate than if you weren't gaining. And I usually aim for an average rate of gain of 0.5 to 1.5% of the client's starting body weight on a monthly rather than weekly basis most months. And the speed at which I go will depend primarily on the client's training experience and current body fat levels as well as their psychology. For example, a newbie who's very, very eager to gain muscle and they are almost underweight because they've been really slim their whole life is a good candidate for a slightly faster rate of gain of 1 to 1.5% of their body weight per month, because thanks to being new, they're going to be able to build muscle faster. And because they're so eager, they won't be scared of some fat gain. On the other hand, if I have a very experienced lifter who's been training for 5+ years and or they are a little bit reluctant around gaining body fat, then I'm going to aim for 0.5 to 1% of their body weight per month instead. On the other hand, if you're aiming to gain muscle at maintenance calories, the goal is to keep your fat stores roughly unchanged while increasing muscle mass. Importantly, this might mean that your body weight actually goes up over time, but what's going to happen is that you are going to look leaner because what's increasing is your muscle mass, whereas your body fat is staying roughly the same, which means that the percentage of muscle that you carry increases and your body fat percentage decreases. So you're going to undergo body recomposition where you gain muscle, and as a result of that, your body fat percentage is lower. And that's why you look leaner, even if you have, in absolute terms, the exact same amount of body fat. Of note, this can happen at a visible rate over the span of a few months, but really only under very special circumstances, like if somebody is very, very new to resistance training, and if they've been training for a while, but they took a break, and they've only just come back after a long layoff of several months. Alternatively, if they have been training consistently and they are relatively advanced, but their program has never been or hasn't been optimized for a long time for the purpose of hypertrophy, they may be able to experience body recomposition once they hire a coach who does provide them with an optimized training and nutrition approach that's geared towards specifically the goal of muscle growth. That is the one scenario in which even more advanced trainees can see visible body recomposition, because it's almost like they're getting a new round of newbie gains, because theoretically they are newbies to hypertrophy oriented and hypertrophy optimized training. Under other circumstances, which basically means for all the rest of us mere mortals, we're unlikely to be able to see body recomposition within the span of a few months. It's more likely to happen over years of consistent training. I'll give you an example. My mother just recently called me and we were talking about her gym experience, and she's a lady in her 60s at this point, and she was so excited because she met a really good trainer at her gym who gave her a customized training program rather than one of the cookie cutter programs that she had been given in the past. And she was told to train closer to failure as opposed to simply going for a certain number of reps, as previous not so great trainers had done. Within a month, she gained 1.5 kilos. My mother is 5'1". 1.5 kilos is roughly 3 pounds. That's a lot for her frame. But she says, I look a lot leaner. I can see my muscle twitching on my shoulders. I've never had that before. And I was like, congratulations, mom. You achieved body recomposition. And that's happened because even though she's been very consistent, hitting the gym 3 times per week for years, she's never actually been trained to train close enough to failure, and she's never had a customized program that really challenged her. So for a long time, she was a beginner, so she did make gains on those cookie cutter programs, not really pushing to failure. But recently, given her level of advancement, that just wasn't enough, and she wasn't really seeing much of a difference. Whereas now, thanks to this massive improvement in her training, she's been able to see a lot of quick results. But they will also run out relatively quickly because, as I've said, she's relatively advanced. But I didn't want to burst her bubble and I didn't tell her that. Now, if you're wondering, why doesn't your mother train with you, Nick? The reason is that it's her decision. I believe that it has something to do with parents not really wanting to be coached by their children. In addition to that, my mother is very extroverted and she loves having somebody in the gym with her in real time training. And I can't do that for obvious reasons, given that she lives in Italy and I live in the UK. Anyway, moving on. Phase number 4 is what I call a building and consolidation phase. And this is usually another phase where the target calories are maintenance, and I sandwich this phase between fat loss phases often because the goal is to recover from the diet fatigue incurred in the previous fat loss phase, build muscle at a faster pace than when you were in a deficit, and recharge your mental batteries before you start the next fat loss phase. But I can also program this building and consolidation phase whenever the client needs to prioritize life over fitness for a certain period of time. For example, if you're moving house, changing career, you're going through a divorce, you're getting a baby, that is certainly not the time to pursue bodybuilding at full steam because you won't have the bandwidth for it. So it's the perfect time to consolidate the healthy habits that you've been building so far and to make sure that you maintain whatever results you've accomplished by that point. So now you know the 4 main phases that I utilize in my plans, and I want to move on to the first of the 2 imaginary clients that I want to cover. His name is Cantor, and his main priority is to lose at least 60 pounds in order to feel healthier and to improve upon some concerning cardiometabolic factors that he's found out about thanks to his doctor, and these include high blood pressure and high cholesterol levels. Cantor has never lifted weights before, and he wants to build muscle, but it's a secondary goal to the primary goal of fat loss. After Cantor, I'm going to cover Senna, who has a completely different goal and current body composition. Senna has been lifting regularly for a year, but they think they've hit a muscle growth plateau. They want to look lean and defined, but they can't seem to achieve this, even though they've been in a deficit for the last 6 months. I wanted to present both clients to you, and by the way, tell me you're a fantasy writer without telling me you're a fantasy writer. Have you ever heard any more fantasy names than Cantor and Senna? I think they're really cool names. Anyway, let's imagine that both of these clients start working with me in January 2025, but they are going to have very different journeys under my guidance. Cantor's 2025 physique development plan is going to look like this. Since he carries about 60 pounds of excess body fat right now, I'm going to give him realistic expectations. It's going to take about 1 to 2 years to lose it all in a sustainable manner. Not only because of the amount of total weight, but also because Cantor is very new to both nutrition and training. And for that reason, like most of my very new fat loss clients, the initial phase in his physique development plan is going to be a fat loss primer, during which we're going to focus on developing the basic skills that a beginner like Cantor needs to execute a fat loss phase successfully. And these basic skills include 1. Tracking calories and macros consistently and accurately enough to make progress. 2. Creating balanced meals to meet his calorie, protein, and fiber targets, to feel full even in a deficit, and to have energy throughout the day. 3. Achieving a daily step target as an average across the week in order to promote well-being and to help with fat loss. 4. Including cardio in order to increase fitness and in particular with regards to Cantor's specific situation, to improve upon his cardiometabolic health, to help with his cholesterol levels, and to bring his blood pressure down. 5. Lifting weights at least twice per week to maintain and build muscle, working up to as many times as Cantor can fit into his schedule, because he's really keen on lifting weights. In the very first week of this fat loss primer, Cantor's focus is data collection. He tracks all his food and his movement. With this information, I extrapolate his current maintenance calories and macronutrient needs, and I set some suitable starting nutritional and movement related goals. Following this first week, and throughout the remainder of his fat loss primer phase, the main focus for him is skill and habit building, not weight loss on the scale. Often, my clients do lose weight, even in this phase, but we don't set it as an expectation because everyone learns at a different pace. And until you're good enough at these basic skills that I've just mentioned, you can't expect to experience much, if any, fat loss. I also think that focusing on habit and skill building is important from a mindset perspective because it teaches you that what's truly important to achieve fat loss isn't the scale weight because you have no control over that. It's your behaviors because that's what you do have control over. Now, in my experience, the fat loss primer phase usually lasts 2 to 6 weeks for most people. For Cantor, it lasts about 4 weeks until February 2025, after which we transition into the fat loss phase. Most clients, based on what I've seen in over 5 years of coaching at this point, do very well with a 16 to 20 week long fat loss phase before they find that they need to take a prolonged break from being in a deficit. In the last 2 weeks of his fat loss primer phase, I transitioned Cantor from maintenance calories to their target deficit calorie range, and I helped him build up his protein and his fiber. So that's where we start. Throughout his fat loss phase, we're going to continue increasing his protein and fiber until we hit a suitable amount for him. And at the same time, we aim to keep his caloric intake within his target deficit range that I've set. And I'm going to give him expectations regarding the rate of fat loss, whereby if he sticks to the bottom of the target deficit range, he's going to lose body fat faster, and if he sticks to the higher end of the range, he's going to lose body fat a little bit more slowly. There are pros and cons to both, where if you lose body fat faster, obviously that's an obvious pro, but the potential con is that you now have less food flexibility and you need to be more disciplined, and vice versa if you choose to lose body fat a little bit more slowly. I also always tell my clients that I can change the rate at which they aim to lose fat depending on the situation, meaning if some days they're under a lot of stress and it's simply easier to have more food flexibility, they can stick to the higher end of the range, and vice versa. If they're not under a lot of stress and they just want to dial in fat loss more, they can stick to the bottom end of the range. Either way, within that range that I've set, we will expect to see fat loss. In addition to that, if needed, I may decide to increase Cantor's cardio and or his steps in order to encourage a faster rate of fat loss, and or I may implement more resistance training sessions, not to not to burn calories, because resistance training isn't all that helpful for calorie burning, but in order to build muscle faster. However, if I ask Cantor to go to the gym more often, he will find himself doing more steps and being more active. And at the end of the day, resistance training does burn more calories than staying at complete rest. So this will also help towards a slightly larger deficit and therefore a slightly faster rate of fat loss. But it's very important for me that my clients understand that we don't lift weights to lose body fat, we lift weights to build muscle. Peppered across his fat loss phase, Cantor also spends some days and even an entire week at a time sticking with his estimated maintenance calories for holidays or social meals or other special celebrations. But Importantly, these occasions are carefully selected because ultimately Cantor wants to still be social, but his main goal is to lose body fat. And if we take a holiday or a break from a deficit every other week or every week or every couple of days, well, obviously, dear listeners, we're not gonna see very much fat loss, are we? Ultimately, we can take break at maintenance, that's perfectly fine, but we do want to spend the majority of the time in a deficit if the main goal is fat loss. We then conclude Cantor's initial fat loss phase when his diet fatigue reaches a threshold at which they experience the following symptoms to an extent that we consider undesirable. Number one, a lot of hunger and food focus, where they're thinking about food much more often than before and to a degree that they're not comfortable with. Number two, they start building up resentment towards being in a deficit. And if at the beginning they were telling themselves, this is my choice and I want to be losing body fat, now Cantor is starting to tell himself, why am I doing this? I don't want to be dieting right now. This is such a chore. Number three, he's struggling to stick with his calorie target more and more. Number four, he's starting to get sleep and or mood disturbances that seem to have no other explanation, so they may have to do with the length of time and the degree and the extent to which they have been in a deficit. At some point, most people may experience these symptoms, and it tends to happen either when they're hitting the 16 to 20 week mark or when they've lost around 10% of their initial body weight, because 10% is a it's a clinically significant amount of weight to lose, whereby researchers in studies consider this enough to make a considerable improvement to somebody's cardiometabolic markers if they have obesity or if they are overweight. And doctors will typically say if you can lose and maintain at least 5 to 10% of your weight to somebody who has obesity, even if this isn't enough for them to no longer have obesity or to no longer be overweight, it can still make a significant positive impact on their health. So it is a considerable amount of weight to lose. Now, at this point in Cantor's journey, it's time to transition back to their estimated maintenance calories for a little longer than a day or a week. So Cantor reaches the end of his fat loss phase after 20 weeks, which takes us up to July 2025, when we move into a building and consolidation phase, during which he's going to eat enough calories to maintain his new lower body weight and to support his lifting. He's going to train hard to continue building muscle, which is going to happen faster now that he's not in a deficit. And he's going to practice maintaining his new lower body weight, both by tracking calories, but also by taking an untracked approach, because ultimately I want Cantor to end his coaching experience with me and his physique development journey, being able to transition between tracking calories and not tracking calories, and being able to maintain his results either way. I don't want any client to use MyFitnessPal or any calorie tracking app as a crutch. At this point in his journey, Cantor has lost 30 pounds, which was an average rate of 1.5 pounds per week in his fat loss phase. Given that his starting body weight was 200 pounds, that's around 0.75% of his body weight per week, which is smack bang within the range I'd recommend for sustainable and effective fat loss, as said before. Importantly, I keep saying that he has lost this much on average per week, because on some weeks Cantor lost no weight. On some weeks Cantor lost 2 pounds, which is 1% of his body weight, so a faster rate. This is simply the average. 0.75% is simply the average across the 20 weeks. So if you're not losing exactly at the rate that you would expect week on week, zoom out across multiple weeks, because it's very common for your body weight not to respect the exact math that you would want, especially if, for example, you have a menstrual cycle or you have IBS symptoms, whereby your weight is changeable because sometimes you're constipated, sometimes you have diarrhea, and other similar factors that affect your scale weight, which is why it's so important to use at least another metric to track your body composition, such as pictures and or measurements. My clients never just give me their body weight on the scale. In any case, going back to Cantor, he now has 30 pounds left to go, and he aims to go back into a deficit after his building and consolidation phase. So now it's my turn to decide together with him how long to wait before going into another deficit. And this is what I take into consideration. First of all, you're likely ready for more fat loss when your diet fatigue is really low or ideally non-existent. You don't want to get into a deficit still in a state of diet fatigue because you're not going to be able to be consistent with that for very long. Number two, from a psychological perspective, you've been enjoying your maintenance calories and the extra food flexibility for long enough that another stretch of dieting feels like an exciting and empowering choice rather than a chore. Number three, you want to align the start of the next fat loss phase with a reasonably standard season of your life. There's never going to be a perfect time, but you also don't want to start a diet the week before you go on holiday abroad for 2 weeks, because that's clearly not a smart idea. In terms of average duration for a building and consolidation phase, Dr. Mike Israetel, an exercise scientist from the company Renaissance Periodization, somebody that I greatly respect and have learned a lot from, usually recommends that this type of phase lasts at least 2/3 of the time that you previously spent dieting. So if we're going to use that rule of thumb for Cantor, that's roughly 12 weeks. So during these 12-week periods, Cantor maintains his weight within a few pounds, but he continues losing inches. Their clothes fit more loosely, and their pictures show improvements in their physique. This is because Cantor is still a beginner, so he can achieve some body recomposition, meaning, as I was saying previously, he can lose fat and build muscle at the same time, even at maintenance calories, as long as he hits the gym regularly with good form and hard enough. All things that I guarantee you that he's doing really well after working with me since the beginning of the year. In any case, we don't only use a rule of thumb for Cantor, I also check in with him on a weekly basis, and when we deem that he no longer has a concerning amount of diet fatigue, his building and consolidation phase comes to a close, and we're now in October 2025, when we start the fat loss phase 2.0, and we plan ahead until the end of the year. Because at the end of the year, there are a lot of holidays planned, so I want to make sure that we prioritize the right ones, and we also don't compromise Cantor's fat loss goal. He lives in the UK, so he's not bothered about Thanksgiving, but he tells me that December 24th, 25th, and 26th are very important dates. So we agree on being in a deficit up until December 20th, which is around 11 weeks of deficit. Then we're going to take a week-long break from the deficit from December 21st to December 28th, during which we're going to aim to maintain the newly achieved body weight by either tracking whenever this is appropriate for him, and not tracking if on Christmas Day or Boxing Day he wants to have an untracked day where he's going to focus on eating mindfully. After enjoying the festivities, Cantor goes back into a deficit for 8 more weeks until February 2026, before we end this second stretch of fat loss, which in total, including the week-long break at maintenance, is another 20 weeks. Now, the less body fat you have to lose, the slower fat loss becomes. So in this fat loss phase 2.0, Cantor loses 20 pounds, not 30, which at their starting weight of 170 pounds equals about 0.6% of their body weight per week on average. And this is good, not only because it's expected, given that he has less body fat to lose, but also because the leaner you are, the greater the risk for muscle loss. So it makes sense to aim to lose body fat at a slower rate to make sure that that doesn't happen. And that's a wrap for Cantor's year. Of course, he loves me and he keeps working with me way past February 2026. But for the purpose of this podcast, I want to limit my example to a single year. And now I want to move on to Senna's 2025 physique development plan. So, as a recap, Senna has a little bit more experience than Cantor. They've been lifting regularly for a year already, and they've been trying to stay in a deficit for the last 6 months because their goal is to look leaner. Now, like Cantor, Senna is going to start with a priming phase, but for them, this is going to be a muscle gain primer phase, not a fat loss primer phase. I understand that Senna wants to look leaner, and that's why they've been trying to diet. But they've already spent 6 months trying to achieve fat loss, and they have not accomplished the look that they wanted. They lost some weight in the first 3 months, but after that, they haven't seen much of a change in either their weight or their physique. And now there are two reasons for this. In part, this is likely because of metabolic adaptation, meaning that their body has learned to be more efficient with their energy expenditure. So even though they've been eating the same number of calories, and technically there was a deficit in the beginning, it's become a smaller and smaller deficit, thus slowing down fat loss. Now, this alone should not have stopped fat loss completely, which leads to my second point. The second reason why Senna has been struggling is that they've admitted to me that they weren't as disciplined with their diets in the last 3 months as they had been in the first three. And they couldn't know this, so I don't blame them. But it is because they had accumulated too much diet fatigue to be able to maintain that discipline for 6 months straight. So Senna was in a deficit mindset for 6 months, meaning they were focusing really hard on losing body fat without actually losing body fat, which is an awful place to be because you feel like you're exercising so much cognitive restraint to stay in a deficit and you're seeing no results for your freaking hard work. For this reason, Senna has a lot of diet fatigue to recover from. So this isn't the right time for another round of fat loss because we would simply be digging them a greater hole. At the same time, Senna doesn't have obesity. They're not overweight. They already carry a healthy amount of body fat. They want to look leaner, but they start from a lean position already. The problem is that they don't have the muscle definition they want because they don't have enough muscle yet. So instead of trying and likely failing to diet again, Senna's muscle gain primer phase is going to help them learn the skills to complete a successful muscle building phase in a calorie surplus. And since Senna is more advanced than Cantor, we don't need to worry about basic skills like tracking calories and macros, and I can set them more advanced goals. So their skills will relate to training with enough volume and intensity of effort and with the right form to build as much muscle as possible, because that's likely why they've hit a plateau in terms of muscle growth. With somebody who's been training for a year, when they come to me and they're not seeing muscle growth, it's because their training isn't optimized for hypertrophy and I write them a better program, but also their execution isn't optimized, whereby they're either training with improper form or they're simply not training hard enough. So that's what we're trying to focus here with Senna. We're then going to focus on eating enough protein and calories to sustain a moderate surplus and maximize muscle growth while minimizing fat loss. We're then going to focus on eating enough fiber and nutrients to support digestion and general health, which in turn can help build more muscle because a healthy body responds better to a resistance training stimulus. And health includes digestive health, which is a little bit of a more advanced target. We're then going to focus on following a regular meal schedule that focuses on their peri-workout nutrition in order to maximize the effects of their training sessions. We're going to do enough steps and/or enough cardio to promote well-being and recovery from training in the form of active recovery. We're going to focus on sleeping long and well enough, which has a major impact on muscle gain and fat loss. And we're going to do our best to manage Senna's stress to the best of our abilities so that stress doesn't compromise their ability to make gains in the gym because our body deals with all stressors with the same reservoir of energy, meaning that it's going to deal with work stress with the same reservoir that it pulls from to recover from training, which is also a stressor. So the better we manage our stress outside of training, the better the results we'll get from training because we'll have more energy to recover from it. Given Senna's pre-existing experience, their muscle gain primer phase is around 4 weeks. We don't need up to 6, as other clients may. And we spend them at maintenance calories, priming them for the surplus. Then we transition into the muscle gain phase, during which the goal is to train hard enough to achieve progressive overload and to eat enough to promote a moderate rate of weight gain, while accepting that some body fat gain is inevitable in a surplus. Senna starts at 150 pounds, with little body fat and little muscle mass, and a waist circumference of 75 centimeters. So they have plenty of runway to gain weight before the extra body fat starts impacting their health negatively. In 24 weeks, from February to August, Senna gains 9 pounds, which is a rate of 1% of their starting body weight per month, which is just perfect based on the average rate of gain I aim for described earlier. And after such a successful muscle gain phase, Senna is more muscular, but since they have a little bit more extra body fat, they don't yet have the definition they aspire to. So we shift gears into a fat loss phase from August until November. In 12 weeks, Senna loses 9 pounds at a rate of 0.5% of their starting weight. So they start at 159 pounds and they lose about 0.5% of that on average every week. So we're losing body fat at a slightly faster speed than we put on weight because we were in the muscle gain phase to gain the same 9 pounds for 6 months, whereas now it only takes 3 months, 12 weeks, to take it all off, which is why I encourage you not to be afraid of a little bit of fat gain because it takes way less time if you are consistent and if you are driven and disciplined to lose any body weight you may put on and to achieve the results that Senna achieves, which is by the end of their fat loss phase, Senna is the same weight as when they started in January at 150 pounds, but they look very different. They've built more muscle, so that means that they look leaner. They look like they are actually smaller and slimmer, because that's what you look like when at the same weight you carry more muscle, because muscle weighs the same as fat. 1 kilogram is always 1 kilogram, regardless of the material we're taking into account. But it takes up less space, whereas body fat takes up a greater amount of space. You can quickly see this if you Google 1 pound of fat versus 1 pound of muscle and you look at the pictures. There's usually a picture of a model of body fat and a model of what muscle tissue looks like, and you can see exactly how much more dense muscle is compared to body fat. Importantly, now that Senna has had a taste of what putting on muscle can do to their physique, they're a lot more enthusiastic about it, and they don't care so much about losing body fat all the time like they did before they started working with me. So now they're super excited about another surplus, and because the winter holidays and many social meals are fast approaching, this is also the perfect time of year for it. So in November 2025, we start another muscle gain phase until spring 2026. And that is the end of Senna's physique development yearly plan. So hopefully these two imaginary clients have given you a good example of what a year of developing your physique and alternating these different phases may look like depending on your goal and your starting point. If you had any questions as you were listening, such as how do you do a deficit break, or why would you set up that particular rate of fat loss, and how do you set your calories to achieve that, all you need to do is input some relevant keywords in the search bar when looking up this podcast, because I have so many episodes where I've covered the details about how to conduct a fat loss phase and how to conduct a muscle gain phase and a maintenance phase successfully. So you will find plenty of information on this in prior podcasts by simply searching for the right keyword. Finally, if you want similar results to Canter and Senna, I have plenty of real clients' experiences and pictures and testimonials that you can look at on my website, which you can visit via the link in the show notes. And via that same link, you find an explanation of my services and a link to the application form to fill out if you want to start working with me and set yourself up for success in 2025. As always, thank you so much for being generous with your time and for listening to this episode today. I was very excited to share this knowledge with you, and I look forward to doing it again next week. Thanks so much for listening, and until next time. Lastly, if you want to support the podcast and help me reach more people, please leave a 5-star rating or review on any podcast platform that you're using. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll speak to you soon.